Welcome back to the Cheap Air Gunner channel. This is Cherokee Steve. I was going to make a single video, but after that last video, things turned into a giant cluster. The transfer port that I made out of the tubing that I had did get damaged when the barrel pulled out with the barrel band. Didn't think that was going to be a big deal. Yeah, I was going to have to remove the breech, which I did, cut a new transfer port, which I did, reassembled everything at that point, which was basically just the breech and the barrel and the pump assembly. But when I went to shoot it and try to pump it, even with the bolt pulled back, it fired once, and then it wouldn't pump after that. I was getting that farting noise, even with the bolt pulled back. So I knew something was wrong, and I knew something was wrong with the valve. Now, unfortunately, in the process of assembling the gun, actually disassembling the gun, the valve is the last thing. You pretty much need to disassemble the whole thing. Remove the trigger grip frame, remove the breech, remove the barrel, remove the pump assembly, remove the internals of the pump tube as far as the hammer and hammer spring go, and then you're left with the pump tube and the valve, which I removed the valve, and what I found out while doing that was the stem of the valve poppet assembly had got pushed in so far that it was actually stuck in a pushed in position, which of course would not allow the valve to fill up with air. Things started to come back to me. It's been almost 2 years since I did all the modifications on my 2289 backpacker. And things, like I said, memories started to flow back with some issues I had when I was doing that. And I assumed before breaking open the valve for the 1322 that probably the same thing was happening. And I believe what I did with the 2289 was install an extremely light valve spring. Probably the exact same type that I had installed in the 1322. And I believe the same thing happened, where in my 2289 it would not pump up because the valve poppet and valve stem were stuck in an open position. So after breaking the valve from the 1322 apart, and I basically took out the spring that I had in there, and what I remembered at that point, and I had read it somewhere on a forum. I want to give credit where credit's due. I can't remember who the poster was, but it basically said that if you're modifying a 13 series Crossman gun, a spring that makes a good, decently compromised strength and lighter than stock valve spring is the trigger sear spring. So since I had that from the teardown of this and modifying the trigger, with the valve apart, I replaced the extremely light valve spring with what was the trigger slash sear spring for the 1322. It's a much stiffer spring than the one I was using, but that's kind of the point of why obviously I was doing this. Hopefully, and I do believe that that's going to lead to that stem not getting stuck, valve stem getting stuck in an open position. So, the unfortunate part was having to reinstall and remove and reinstall and remove and reinstall the valve, because again, those holes, the port in the valve and the mounting holes themselves on the other half were constantly not lined up. I was eyeballing things, tightening the two halves together, loosening up the two halves together a little bit, trying to get, and keep in mind I have two mounting holes now, since I added that 632 grub screw on the top of the valve that goes through the pump tube to make the valve more rigid. In addition to that, directly 180 degrees beneath it on the other side of the valve is the screw that goes into the front portion of the trigger guard. So those holes had to be perfectly lined up with the port in the valve. And I had difficulties doing that. So, like I said, it was a process of 3 or 4 times pulling the valve back out of the tube after I got it in, realizing that those holes weren't lined up, doing some minor adjusting, tightening, loosening the two halves of the valve. Keep in mind, the thing that actually does the sealing on the valve itself, between those two halves, is the O-ring that is there. So you want to be careful not to damage that as you're removing and disassembling your valve, and to have it not cranked down super tight, the two halves of the valve. It's okay, because the sealing isn't really from the pressure between the two halves, it's from the O-ring that goes between the male and female threads on the valve. So, with all of that said, the gun is back together. The gun has the, as referred to in the previous video, it has the stuffed piston put inside of it. I have not done any shooting with the gun since then. There's a couple of things I need to do, since I had to remove the dot sight to do the disassembly. You cannot get to, oh, that's another thing. Reminds me that removing the dot sight was necessary because of that little tiny small breech screw that's underneath the bolt that you can only get to with the bolt pulled back. You can't get to it with the dot sight attached to the mounts, so I had to remove that. And then after having replaced the spring in the valve and having everything reassembled, I like to alternate between the two screws that hold the breech down, that little tiny screw underneath the bolt and the screw that goes through the rear sight. I tighten down each one, working my way back and forth between the two a little bit until they both start to feel snug, and then I'll go and tighten down both of them securely. Unfortunately, with that tiny breech screw, using a .050 Allen wrench, I stripped it with the Allen wrench, you know, went just a hair past tight, and you know, as soon as I felt that Allen wrench slip, I feared the worst, and that was what the worst is. You strip it out. I could not get it backed out. I did not want to leave the gun in that condition for whomever wins the giveaway. If the choice is made to install a different style breech on the gun, it would be necessary for that little screw to come out. And I've done this before. It's extremely common with all Crossman guns. Um, Regardless, even if you have the steel breech, it's going to have that tiny 050 screw. I believe it's a 448 thread, but 050 Allen wrench that tightens and loosens it comes with, you know, your 2240, your 2289, your 1322, pretty much, you know, all of the more popular Crossman guns. Fortunately, because I've already done this, I have stripped them out before, working on my other Crossmans. I have quite a few extras. I was putting in an order with Crossman for various extra parts, and included in that order about 10 of those tiny breech screws. So I knew I had extras. The only way that I know of to get it out after it's been stripped is you have to drill the head of the screw off. Now, getting a drill centered is fairly simple because you've already got a hole, the stripped out hex pattern in the middle of the screw, which the point of the drill is going to pick up. But you got to be careful not to go too deep. You want to get just to the point where the head of the screw breaks off. You want to leave as much of the threaded portion within the hole in the pump tube that it screws into. If you can get it where just the head breaks off, a couple of those threads are going to be sticking up out of the pump tube. So after drilling off the head and removing the rear sight screw, take the breech off, and with what I did with a pair of needle nose pliers, there was enough thread sticking up that I was able to grab it and turn it and back it out. Then I had to reassemble everything with the brand new breech screw. So, actually saying that this was kind of an understatement. But everything's been reassembled. The packed piston is in there. The valve spring has been changed out from the super light one that I had in there to what was the stock sear spring. So hopefully that takes care of everything, but because the dot sight was removed, I've got to re-sight that in. I'm going to re-chrony it and get new numbers. The replacement valve spring certainly can affect the velocities. We'll see what happens. Hopefully everything works out fine, where the gun consistently functions fine and shoots well. I also want to do some accuracy testing. So with all of that said, I didn't want to make a super long video. You know, I was debating including all of this information with the last video, and thought that that was going to make a super long video, but I just wanted to explain everything that happens. This is a common occurrence when you're modding and working on uh, your your pistols and guns, rifles. Um, the assembling and then disassembling. You really can't see, you know, what may be wrong, especially like I was saying with a valve, until the gun has been put back together and you're firing it. And what may go wrong over a longer period of time, and eliminating any bugs that pop up. Um, that's certainly what happened in this case. Uh, it certainly, you better have some patience if you're going to go about doing modifications like this. Uh, but the gun's back together, and I'm going to get to the accuracy testing, resighting in the dot scope, and re-getting some velocity numbers. So that'll be the next video. Thanks for checking this one out and coming along this journey with me. So stay safe and shoot safe.